Do you want to be part of something bigger? At Siemens, we use AI to transform the everyday. Our engineering solutions drive innovation and change. We're leading in technology and building a sustainable future. Join Siemens and make an impact to transform the everyday. Apply now and be part of something extraordinary. Visit siemens.co.in/careers.
Today on CityCast Denver, the governor is making backroom deals on property taxes. The GOP is barring the press from leadership votes. Leading Democrats are negotiating bills without explaining themselves. How come our politicians are getting so secretive? I'm sitting down with two veteran reporters from ColoradoPolitics.com today to talk about what both Democrats and Republicans are doing behind all those closed doors. Today is Monday, September 9th. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Ernest Looning, welcome to CityCast Denver.
Hi, good to be here.
And Marianne Goodland, welcome back to CityCast Denver.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
So we're going to talk about a few different stories you all have been covering, but I think the theme of the summer in Colorado politics has been transparency or a lack thereof. Marianne, I want to start with this letter that you sent to the Colorado Press Association on this topic. Can you talk about that letter and why you sent it?
Yeah, the Colorado Press Association has this award called Defenders of the Free Press, and it is something that they've been doing for since 2022. So this was the third iteration of that, and the award is given to legislators at the state capitol. And frankly, this has not exactly been on my radar, or frankly, the radar of a lot of other folks until this year. The Press Association held its annual convention 2 weeks ago. And among the awardees, and there were about 10 or 11 of them, was the president of the Senate, Steve Fenberg of Boulder, and the Speaker of the House, Julie McCluskey of Dillon. And during the 2024 session, they ran a bill, Senate Bill 157, that was a response to a lawsuit that had been filed against the legislature last year by two of their own members. In fact, two Democrats, Elizabeth Epps and Bob Marshall. And they were challenging the lack of transparency in how the legislature does its business. This is no secret. It's one of the biggest fights that the press has with lawmakers every year, is just trying to get access to the conversations that they're having that they have behind closed doors. Then came the 2024 session, and the two lawmakers that I mentioned, Fenberg and McCluskey, ran a bill, Senate Bill 157, that pretty much undid that agreement and basically said, if it's not directly about a piece of legislation, we can talk about whatever we want, and nobody outside of our caucuses or anyone else has a right to see it. And we knew back when this bill was running through the legislature, everybody was opposed to it. The broadcasters were opposed to it. The Press Association didn't take a formal position, but they negotiated with Fenberg and McCluskey to make what we consider to be a very bad bill less bad, which is the explanation I was given on why they gave this award. And so as the special session was getting closer and closer, we started to see the tangible effects of this legislation. We were being shut out of meetings. We were being shut out of conversations that they were having about the legislation that was coming up. Even though they claimed that it was more about logistics, we know darn well that it was more than that. But we couldn't challenge it because they had passed this law. So the Press Association winds up giving a Defenders of the Free Press award to two lawmakers who made the biggest change in our state's open meetings law since it was passed in 1972. And the governor signed it on the first day of National Sunshine Week, which was kind of a slap in the face to the free press. And so when they gave these lawmakers this award 2 weeks ago, there were a lot of people. It wasn't just me. In fact, I didn't even know about it until someone else said, "Did you know they did this?" And I went, "What? No, you can't do that." So I talked to my colleagues at the press corps. I'm the dean of the state capitol press corps. And I also talked to their bosses, the publishers and the editors. And I said, we need to say something about this. This isn't right. these people are not defenders of the free press. If anything, they're exactly the opposite. So I drafted a letter. I sent it around to all the members of the press corps. I sent it around to a lot of editors and other reporters outside of the press corps who had taken an interest in this. And in the end, we made some changes, softened the language a little bit, and sent the letter to the Colorado Press Association. And as I said in the letter, we know who the defenders of the free press are. We work with these people every day. And more importantly, we know who isn't.
So speaking of that world, Ernest, have you noticed a change in how politicians deal with the press in recent years?
I don't know that there's a change. I think politicians have always been a little leery about being as fully transparent as we would like them to be. But, what Mary Ann points out is right. It's not just Republicans. It's also Democrats. And, basically anyone with power likes to do things without the glare of publicity when they have the chance.
So you're kind of saying this is maybe not I don't want to say a constant struggle, but it's something that those of us in the press deal with pretty consistently with legislators?
I think so, yeah. Legislators and politicians in general. They want to get the message out. They need publicity. They're trying to build public support for things. When they're campaigning, they're wanting to reach voters with their message. And that's in tension, though, with how transparent they want to be on a day-to-day basis about how they make some of their decisions and some of the procedures that they use. That's probably most apparent and most glaring at the Capitol.
Lawmakers are meeting with each other behind closed doors. Do they tell us that they're doing it? No. If we happen to find out, we can push for it. And I've sort of coined the phrase among the Capitol of storming the gates. From time to time, we see them doing something that we think the public has a right to know about, and we'll go into those rooms. We'll knock on the door. We'll walk in. We're polite, but we say the public has a right to know what you guys are talking about here. So, and I've had a couple of really, really interesting conversations with lawmakers and the governor as well about these efforts to see more transparency among how lawmakers do their work.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the governor. So we're gonna touch on a couple things related to the Democrats, and then we'll head to you, Ernest, for some stuff happening in the GOP. But speaking of the governor, Marian, you covered the special legislative session on property taxes, and in this case, it sounds like it was some lawmakers themselves who were complaining about Governor Polis making a quote unquote sort of backroom deal. Can you explain what happened in that session?
There was a Republican senator named Barbara Kirkmeyer, who was part of a collaborative bipartisan group during the end of the regular session, which ended last May. They put together a bill on property taxes that would provide somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 billion in property tax savings and property tax relief. But they didn't have a cap on how much revenue could grow through property taxes, or they didn't have one that was sufficient. So the folks running those ballot measures, Colorado Concern and Advanced Colorado, didn't sign off on that deal. After the session was over with, you still had these two ballot measures sort of hanging over the heads of everything. And there was a real concern among Democrats in particular, but Republicans too, that this was going to force massive cuts in the state budget, because the ballot measures required state government to cover that lost property tax revenue. And the estimate that we heard for just the first year was going to be about $3 billion. So Kirkmeyer, who's on the Joint Budget Committee, she's the ranking Republican, got to the folks running the ballot measures and said, will you come back to the table? Will you keep talking to us? And she spent 7 weeks working with them, and eventually contacted the governor's office and said, they're ready to talk. Can we negotiate? And they came up with this deal. And then they brought it to the legislature, and you all of a sudden heard all this fussing from progressive Democrats, primarily in the House, who said, listen, this bill was negotiated with oligarchs and people with big money, which frankly is true. There's a lot of money behind these two ballot measures and these two groups. A lot of it that we don't even know sometimes who's funding it. And they said this is going to be a big benefit to people who are at the upper income scale, who have the $5 million house versus the person who has the house that's valued at, say, $550,000, which is the median house price in the Denver area. They were fussing about this. In the end, 14 of the 18 no votes in the House against this bill were from progressive Democrats, which I think made a pretty interesting statement.
You're someone that's covered this kind of thing for so long. Did this strike you as a backroom deal?
Everything is a backroom deal.
Fair.
It was really funny because on the first day of the session, prior to them starting on the floor, the Democrats held a sort of a press avail, and we were all in the city in the Speaker's office, and Chris Hansen, the Senate sponsor of the bill, was talking about that whole backroom deal, and he just says, "I've been in hundreds of meetings like this before. This is how it's done," and I don't think he meant to acknowledge that is exactly how it's done. So, yes, a lot of this legislation is a matter of backroom deals. It just depends on who's involved. And the progressive Democrats were unhappy because this time they got left out.
Well, Ernest, let's switch over and talk about the GOP. And honestly, I'm not sure where to start with Dave Williams. He's been controversial. But could you set the stage for these two votes that have happened over the last couple of weeks related to his position?
Dave Williams he's a former state lawmaker from Colorado Springs, and he's the chairman of the state GOP. He was elected last March 2023, and has taken the party in a somewhat different direction than the previous chairs. His supporters say finally the grassroots of the Republican Party, which in this case means the maybe Trumpier wing of the party, actually is running things. Okay, there's been a lot of backlash along the way. Maybe the traditional Republicans, the more Mitt Romney style Republicans, the country club, Main Street Republicans, have been pushing back, and since January have been actually calling for Dave to be removed as chair. What initially sparked that was when he jumped in the primary race in the 5th Congressional District. And some other candidates talked about getting in. One actually made it to the primary ballot, Jeff Crank. But what Dave didn't do when he launched his campaign was step down as state party chair. And over the next roughly 5 months, Dave's critics say that he used the party apparatus, resources, what amounted to tens and tens of thousands of dollars to both attack Jeff Crank and support his own campaign. Now, that got folks really riled up. Anyway, so then in June, things really blew up when the party under Dave Williams and with Dave's amplification launched its annual attack on Pride Month. With an email blast that went out saying God hates flags, which is a twist on a Westboro Baptist Church term that was a very offensive term that was used for years and years to denigrate the LGBTQ community. In message after message, the state party said, this June, burn all the pride flags. Republicans all around the state just were outraged and said, these are our voters. This is Colorado. We've got a gay governor. We've used to be known as the hate state when Colorado passed Amendment 2 30 years ago, but we've been working for years to get away from that reputation. And here comes the GOP attacking its own constituents and they're making it hard for Republican candidates in most of the state to actually make their appeal. But eventually what happened was some of Dave's critics, including some folks who had been among his biggest fans last year, Todd Watkins, who was the vice chairman down in El Paso County, had been one of Dave's closest allies, turned on Dave and said, we need to get this guy out of here. He's undermining the chances for Republicans to get elected. And there was a chair out in Jefferson County, Nancy Pelosi, who also, and they started gathering petition signatures because under the party bylaws, if 25% of the members of the state central committee, which is about a 400 member of Republican officials, county officers, elected officials, and what they call bonus members, which are other Republicans elected based on the Republican vote in the last election. Anyway, it's about 400 folks. So they needed about a little over 100 signatures to force a meeting to recall Dave Williams.
Okay, I remember this part. They got those signatures. Then there was this whole bunch of legal wrangling that led to these two parallel meetings of the Central Committee that we've seen headlines about. But can you tell me about what happened at the first meeting back on August 24th?
And at that meeting, about half the members of the Central Committee showed up. It was up at a church in Brighton, and they voted Dave out. They voted Vice Chair Hope Schepelman out, and they voted the Secretary Anna Ferguson out, and they elected a new slate of leaders. Dave had told his people, don't attend this meeting. It's an illegal meeting. It's fraudulent. Nothing that happens there will count. Instead, attend the meeting in Castle Rock on August 31st. And that's basically what happened. About half the members of the Central Committee attended the meeting that fired Dave. And then this past Saturday, about half the members of the State Central Committee attended, either in person or by proxy, the meeting that gave Dave a vote of approval and said, hey, we want you all to stay on as chair. So now the Republican Party has two chairs.
So that's where we're at, is like there's Eli Bremer, the other gentleman that was elected by a segment of this group, and then Dave Williams, who was retained by a segment, essentially.
Right. And, it couldn't happen at a better time. Ballots go out in just 40 days, less than 40 days.
And an election, in a presidential election year, no less, too.
Presidential election year where we've got two competitive House races. But I think both Jeff Hurd and Gabe Evans, who's a state lawmaker running against Yadira Caraveo, they say they want some help from the state party and that they're not getting it. Ugh. And that's one reason that they both endorsed Eli Bremer once he was elected chair.
And that meeting in Brighton, they didn't allow press in, right?
No, the meeting in Brighton, the one that was the first meeting held by Dave's critics, they welcomed the press. Press was there. We were able to observe everything. There was 4 or 5 reporters up there. There was some TV cameras. The meeting lasted about 4 hours. There was a lot to hear, but we could do things like both interview people who were supporting Dave and the people who got up and gave speeches talking about why they wanted Dave thrown out. We could also observe the counting of the ballots, and we could something else here. We could count the folks in the room. So when they said that they had about 100 people there, and then the rest were by proxy. But we could physically go around and count the folks and see if that lined up. It was the next meeting, the one that Dave called, that was held a week later, August 31st, at a church in Castle Rock. Lovely facility. They've had Central Committee meetings there before. And, and I'll say, the press was not allowed. There was private security keeping us out. I know of at least 3 or 4 reporters who tried to get in and were told no. Press is not allowed. They pointed to a sign that said, the Republicans reserve the right to refuse entry to anybody. Although, let's put this in perspective. There's a lot of things that we couldn't do being in the room there, like count how many people were actually in the room, like talk to folks easily who were supporting Dave and the small number of people who were opposing him at that meeting. But they did stream the meeting. Someone put up and streamed it on Facebook Live. The quality was not great. You couldn't see things really well, and the audio wasn't terrific, but you could follow what was going on. But I will say, the reason I was familiar with this church is the Colorado Republicans had their Central Committee meetings there last August and September. Packed house, press was welcome, plenty of reporters showed up. We reported on what the committee was doing, what they decided, and that was under Dave's chairmanship. That this was new.
Well, I think it's going to be interesting to watch both parties as they deal with this situation going through, again, a presidential election. We've still got a lot of time. It's a lot of time and it's not. For us as reporters, this is that time of year when it feels like it's never ending. But it's just interesting to me that we're seeing some struggles on both sides of the aisle when it comes to press access. Marianne, do you think that the journalists covering the Dems have it easier than the reporters covering the GOP?
We certainly are not prohibited from covering things like the state assembly, although they do most of this stuff via Zoom nowadays rather than doing them in person. But the state Democratic Party, at least, has been generally very transparent with the press. It's when you get to the state capitol that transparency kind of takes a nosedive.
That's an interesting point. Well, Marianne and Ernest, this has been really interesting. We're going to be watching. We're obviously watching this election going forward, but I appreciate you both taking time today. Thank you so much.
Anytime.
Oh, thank you.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed the show, why not take a minute to tell Dave Williams about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See you later. Today? Oh. What?